Welcome to Tom's True Crime. Today's episode takes us to South Beach, Florida, September 30th, 2017, 9 a.m. Hannah Skybane was found dead in her own home. South Beach is located in Miami Beach, Florida. Renowned for white sand beaches and turquoise waters, South Beach attracts tourists and locals alike with its scenic beauty, lively ambience, and impressive nightlife with a large array of bars, nightclubs, and restaurants that stay open late into the night, offering everything from high-energy dance clubs to sophisticated rooftop bars. It is a place where anything and everything can happen all hours of the day and night. Hannah had grown up in a Catholic family in St. Charles, Missouri, and in 1999, at the age of 27, she decided to move to South Beach, Florida. Hannah began her career in retail sales, working at prestigious stores like Saks Fifth Avenue and Gucci. However, she was captivated by the vibrant, glamorous nightlife of South Beach and recognized the abundant opportunities it offered. She transitioned from retail to nightlife, starting as a bartender and then advancing to a mixologist and VIP host at some of the area's most popular and upscale nightclubs and venues. Hannah made friends easily, and they became a second family for her. Her customers loved her, and Hannah adored her job. Those that knew her said she was always laughing and living her best life. Her friends said she had an innocence about her. She was a free spirit and always had a positive outlook, no matter the situation. In 2007, Hannah met Donald Skybane at Nikki Beach, Miami. Donald would go there frequently, and he said he noticed Hannah because she was bubbly and how the customers just loved her. She was always busy, running around and keeping guests happy. Donald was a star athlete and homecoming king at his school, and his family say he was charismatic, funny, and charming, always wanted to lend a hand to those that needed it. He had his own construction company and was doing quite well. The attraction was instant, and the pair hit it off straight away, becoming inseparable immediately. Donald told his sisters that Hannah was his whole world, and a year later, they welcomed a baby girl whom they called Emily. Friends said Donald was very protective of his new family, and Hannah was besotted with her little girl. A couple of years later, Donald and Hannah married in a beautiful beach wedding in Costa Rica. 2 more years would pass, by all accounts, with everything staying the same as it had always been. That was until Donald suffered a huge setback with his finances. He lost a lot of money in the housing market crash, making Hannah the main earner for the family, and the financial stress began to impact the couple. Hannah eventually confided in people that Donald had become jealous and resentful. It wasn't long before his abuse escalated and became more controlling. Donald would frequently hurl derogatory names at her, such as slut, and the situation was even more distressing because he would do so in front of their young daughter. This humiliation not only demeaned her but also exposed their child to a harmful environment, where the negative and abusive language was normalized. The repeated insults and the blatant disregard for their daughter's emotional well-being created a toxic atmosphere, further compounding the impact of Donald's hurtful behavior. Hannah told friends that things got stranger when Donald introduced her to a man he said he met on a construction site. Donald would get him to do odd jobs around a house and garden. Hannah said she found the man creepy, and whenever he was around, it really made her feel unsafe. Tensions continued to mount in their relationship, and with so much financial strain together with Donald's sudden and spiteful change in personality, Hannah moved out and into her own house. The pair started sharing custody of Emily, as well as seeing a marriage counselor. Hannah was devastated at the breakdown of the relationship, and although she was hopeful that they might one day make things work, she also knew divorce was a strong possibility. She told Donald that once they lived separately, she didn't think there's any going back. Donald was upset and told people that the complications divorce would bring wasn't something he wanted to go through. After living apart for a while, Hannah was beginning to find a new routine. She was still working long hours and was always busy, but the love she had for her work meant she didn't mind. After one late shift, Hannah returned home to find her house had been broken into, and everything was a mess. Several precious and sentimental valuables, including her engagement ring, had been stolen. One item that had been taken that struck everyone as odd were her underpants. Whoever had broken in had also left some boxer shorts behind. Hannah was frightened and on edge, but did her best to put the incident behind her. September 30th, 2017, 3 weeks after the break-in, Hannah clocked off and left work as normal just after 3 a.m. She lived about a 30-minute drive away and arrived home at around 3:30 a.m. She parked in the garage and went inside the house via the door in her garage. 5.5 hours later at 9 a.m., Donald picked up 8-year-old Emily from her grandmother's house. They both drove over to Hannah's to collect some of Emily's belongings. They entered Hannah's home to find that it had been totally ransacked. Hannah Skybane was lying dead on the floor. Donald immediately dialed 911. He told the emergency operator that he wanted to report a break-in and a murder. He said that he found his wife on the floor, bloody, stiff, not moving. He said he had his daughter with him and wanted to take her to his mother's house. The operator told him to stay on site and asked Donald the last time he saw Hannah. Donald appeared to be in shock, and the operator tried to calm him down. After some encouragement from the operator and deep breaths, Donald told the operator that he worked in construction and was on site the day before, so he saw Hannah about a day and a half ago. The operator asked Donald if he could see anything suspicious around Hannah, any weapons, knives, guns. Donald said no, he had to get his daughter out of there. Donald said when he arrived there, the garage door was open, and it's never open. And he and Emily went in to grab some stuff for Emily. He explained that Hannah sleeps during the day because she works at night. Donald said Hannah was on the floor when they walked into the house. He took Emily out of that horrific sight straight away and went into the garage. Donald said he didn't have time to check for a pulse. The operator told Donald to stay there and wait for police and medical officers to arrive. It was clear from the position of the blood in Hannah's body that she had been attacked as she had gone upstairs. The injuries to her body indicated the murder weapon was likely a hammer, and she had suffered horrendously in her last moments. Her skull was crushed, and her fingers were broken from trying to protect herself. There was a hole in the side of her head that was so deep that paramedics thought she had been shot. A neighbor reported to the police that they had heard a thudding sound coming from the house between 3:30 and 4 a.m. But because Hannah normally arrived home at that time, they didn't think it was out of the ordinary. A while later, another neighbor contacted police after finding Hannah's phone, health card, and some of her makeup along the side of a road nearby. As is common with most cases, her estranged husband Donald would be the first to be interviewed. Donald was working away from home on a project in Jacksonville the last few days. He had hotel receipts to prove it, so he was nowhere near Hannah's house at the time of the murder. After confirming this with his colleagues, detectives were satisfied with his alibi, but this left police baffled and confused as to where to start looking. They didn't know if the burglary 3 weeks earlier was linked or was a coincidence. But as Hannah's belongings were found outside of her home, it was entirely possible that the same person had come back to take more things and, not realizing Hannah would be up and awake, killed her and fled the scene. They also didn't know if Hannah was a completely random target or if she was targeted for a specific reason. This left Hannah's work colleagues fearful too. With all of them working late nights and early hours of the morning, they were concerned that one of them could be next. The news of Hannah's death spread quickly. TV stations, such as WFR and WTVJ, began reporting on the incident. Hannah's sister Kathleen and her husband found out about her murder when Donald was still at the scene. They believed there was a lot more to this than a random robbery gone wrong. Despite Donald's alibi, they still wanted to ask him some questions. Kathleen decided to give Donald a call. She asked him what was going on. Donald was sobbing and told Kathleen that Hannah had passed away. When Kathleen started asking another question, Donald handed the phone to a police officer. At that point, Kathleen was convinced Donald had something to do with the murder. She told the police officer exactly what she was thinking, that she suspected Donald was involved in Hannah's murder because of the number of conversations she had had with Hannah. After this, Kathleen and her husband flew out to South Beach straight away. Kathleen said she would forever be haunted by the way in which her sister died. She said the excruciating pain she must have endured and the terror and realization that she was going to die. Just 24 hours after Hannah's body was found, police received a tip that would blow the case wide open. A man that went by the name of G-Rock told detectives he had a friend that he knew only as Slim Jim. Slim Jim told him he had killed a woman with a hammer. G-Rock recalled he wasn't scared, he wasn't upset or traumatized over it. He was laughing and happy as if he just completed a mission. Girock told Slim Jim that the second he saw anyone on the news that had been killed in the way he had told him, he would have to report him. And as word spread that Hannah had been murdered, this confirmed to Girock that Slim Jim had been telling the truth. He went straight to the police. Authorities teamed up with Girock and drove to locations where Slim Jim tends to hang out, believing this would be the best way to find him. They didn't have to wait long before they spotted him. When officers approached Slim Jim, they found he had drugs on him and were able to put him up on drugs charges while they looked into Girock's claims. Slim Jim's real name was Jim McBrook. He was actually well known to police already for various reasons, including theft and drugs-related charges. While he admitted to selling drugs, he vehemently denied having anything to do with Hannah's death. Jim was a low-level criminal, and it was definitely a surprise that he would have traveled so far to commit such a huge crime without really leaving with anything he could have sold. Something wasn't making sense to the interviewing officers. There also didn't seem to be any connection between Jim and Hannah. Police managed to find out where he was staying, and when he was in custody, began searching his house. The area was remote and very secluded, way up in the woods away from everyone and everything. Officers worried that because the area was so vast, they could be searching for any potential evidence for weeks. But Jim had not dumped anything far away, and just a short walk away from his house, they found a pair of his trousers, covered in blood, a price tag belonging to a hammer, and a bloody pair of underwear. Back at the station, detectives were checking through his phone, and they soon found a single contact that seemed to tie everything together for them. Donald. When asked who Donald was, Jim said, "That's my friend." Jim McBrook was the man Donald Skybane had got to do odd jobs around his house and garden, the same man Hannah had found creepy since the moment she met him. Police used the barcode for the hammer to find out where that particular make was sold, and from this, they got hold of some CCTV that left them shocked. The camera inside the store clearly showed Donald Skybane and Jim McBrook shopping together and buying hammers, one of which would ultimately be used to kill Hannah. Officers now felt very strongly that Donald was at the center of what had happened to Hannah. Back at the station, officers presented Jim with all the evidence. Finally, Jim admitted to being Hannah's killer, but just as police had suspected, Jim said it was her estranged husband Donald Skybane that wanted her dead, and he will pay him $10,000 to carry out the crime on his behalf. Jim claimed that he and Donald had spent a long time planning it. Donald had gotten a key cut for Jim, bought some dark clothing for him, and had asked him to stage a robbery weeks before she was killed, almost like a practice run. Jim said that on the day of the murder, after he broke in, he hid in her closet for a while. He then moved into the living room and waited for her there as he heard her driving into the garage. Hannah was on her way up the stairs. Jim followed her up and began his attack there. He said she cried and begged for her life, screaming, "Why are you doing this?" over and over as he struck her a total of 19 times. He then said the hammer broke, and he continued to hit her with a metal part of the hammer until she stopped moving. After retelling the shocking story, he offered to take detectives to where he had buried the hammerhead in the woods. And finally, the detectives had the murder weapon. They also found a fiberglass hammer. It had now been 9 days since Hannah was murdered. And on October 9th, detectives informed Donald's mother and sister that he was being investigated in relation to Hannah's death. They were horrified and adamant that he had nothing to do with it. A matter of minutes later, Donald's sister called her brother and told him. Donald jumped straight into his truck and set off on a fast and dangerous drive around South Beach. This would end in Donald going head-on into a concrete wall along Interstate 195. He was going more than 100 miles per hour. Authorities noted that there were no marks on the road, showing he hadn't tried to brake and stop the car, and this was an intentional crash and an attempt to take his own life. Donald survived because he was wearing his seatbelt and was treated for his injuries at hospital. 2 days later, officers arrived at Donald's hospital bed and informed him he was now under arrest. Donald said okay, then asked for an attorney. Authorities felt they had a strong case and enough to bring charges forward against Donald Skybane and Jim McBrook. Just 3 months later, Jim McBrook would plead guilty in exchange for the death penalty being taken off the table and said he would also testify for the prosecution as their star witness. He was sentenced to 42 years to life in prison. In August 2019, Donald, who was still pleading not guilty, entered the courtroom, ready to begin his trial. Opening statements began Tuesday in the trial of Donald Skybane, a former star athlete and homecoming king accused of hiring a man to kill his wife Hannah Skybane, who was beaten to death with a hammer after returning home from work. During the first day of testimony, the prosecution played the recording of the 911 call from Donald Skybane. Hannah's family were there for every single day, wearing her favorite color, red. Her family gave lead prosecutor Peter Riley Hannah's necklace with a horseshoe pendant. Hannah loved animals, especially horses, and she wore that pendant all the time, saying that it was her good luck charm. Hannah's family hoped that it will bring them good luck. Prosecutor Peter Riley kept it with him throughout the trial. Donald would never take the stand himself, but an array of witnesses, including his sisters and close friends, would testify about the man they said they really knew. A man they said was kind, compassionate, and hardworking, and would have no part in such a heinous crime. The prosecution felt their case was exceptionally strong. Alongside the CCTV and everything Jim had told them, they also had numerous phone records that show that Donald Skybane had called Jim McBrook 84 times in the month of September 2017 and 5 times the night before the murder. An unbelievable amount of times for someone that just occasionally did the odd job here and there. The defense would argue, however, that the CCTV proved nothing. They worked in construction, it's hardly surprising that they would buy tools. The key witness, Jim McBrook, took to the stand and told the court what happened in all its detail. He was questioned at length about how they met and their interactions leading up to the murder. Jim McBrook said he met Donald Skybane at a bar where construction workers often hang out. They got chatting over drinks, and Donald Skybane ended up getting him to do work around his house and yards. The evidence showed that Donald Skybane really planned the murder. It was years in the making. Jim McBrook said that he had known Donald Skybane for a couple of years. They would work out and hang out together sometimes. When questioned, Jim said that he observed Donald and Hannah arguing quite often. Their relationship was bad. They argued about all kinds of stuff. Donald was not happy about the amount of money Hannah was spending. When Donald Skybane initially asked Jim McBrook to kill Hannah, Jim didn't believe him. Donald offered Jim $1,000, but Jim said no. Jim thought he was just talking, blowing off steam. But when Donald increased the price on offer, he took him a bit more seriously. Donald was offering $10,000. Jim would get $1,000 now, the rest when Donald gets the life insurance money. The day after the murder, Jim actually called Donald from a gas station phone to ask for more money. This meeting, however, would never happen because that's the day the detectives made contact with Jim McBrook, and he was taken into custody. Jim also testified that Donald had told him to use a fiberglass hammer because a wooden hammer might break during the attack. On the day of the murder, Jim couldn't find the fiberglass hammer, so he ended up using the wooden one. He was in the house waiting for Hannah to come home. When Hannah walked into the house from the garage, Jim came out from behind the door and hit her in the head with a hammer. She asked him why he was doing this. Jim didn't answer. He had a mask on his face and covered head to toe in dark clothing. He keeps hitting her with a hammer until she falls to the floor. He jumps on top of her and keeps striking her with a hammer. Then the hammer breaks. Jim picks up the metal hammerhead and keeps on hitting her. Although the prosecution argued that everything Jim had said could be backed up by CCTV, phone records, and the time frame of events, while he was being cross-examined, Jim admitted to often having auditory and visual hallucinations. In the defense's eyes, this gave them enough reason to put forward the idea that Jim could have simply made the whole thing up. They weren't disputing that he killed Hannah, but the idea that Donald was involved was a lie. Michael Simpson, Donald's attorney, said it was a good story, but nothing more than that. If you put it all together just the right way, that's what you get. But there's a lot of reason not to put it together that way, he said. It was said that Jim McBrook liked Donald, seeing him as a close friend and looking up to him in many ways, and the prosecution said that's all it took to be able to manipulate him very easily. They said Donald was the only one with a reason to want Hannah dead. They also believed that Donald may have been intending to kill Jim McBrook, as he had recently purchased a gun. If Jim McBrook had been killed, Donald would likely have got away with the crime completely. They, along with Hannah's family, felt Donald was someone that was so used to getting everything he wanted all his life and having huge amounts of success. After the couple's marriage began to spiral, and he was losing control over this as well as his finances, it was all too much for him to handle. After 5 days of testimony and about 3 hours of closing arguments, the jury deliberated for 15 hours over 3 days. As they announced they had come to a verdict, it was extremely tense in the courtroom, and no one could be sure which way things would go. Before they went in, Prosecutor Peter Riley said he put Hannah's lucky horseshoe pendant in his pocket. The clerk reads the verdict. Donald Skybane was found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, guilty of first-degree murder and 6 other counts. Donald Skybane showed no emotion as the verdict was read out. The jury then had to decide whether or not he should receive any parole eligibility. After just 3 hours of deliberation, the jury decided to sentence Donald Skybane to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He will now spend the rest of his life behind bars. He was also given an additional 80 years for convictions of conspiracy, burglary, and robbery. The judge said the sentence is based upon the fact that this was just pure evil. Hannah's sister Kathleen was happy with the result, saying Donald is a controlling manipulator and being in prison for the rest of his life is one version of hell for him because prison isn't the kind of place where you can have everything you want your way. Hannah's family thanked the DA's office, Prosecutor Peter Riley, homicide detectives, and everybody involved. They felt justice was served. The community support for Hannah's family was very strong. So many people loved Hannah and everyone was relieved that they were finally putting this behind them and moving forward. Hannah's family said that things will never be the same without Hannah. All they could do is to find whatever their normal is without Hannah in their lives. They were happy and satisfied that the jurors saw the truth. Donald Skybane appealed the verdict. His appeal included his own handwritten notes, which were over 100 pages long. In those handwritten notes, he wrote about himself. He decided to use a different strategy in the appeal. Instead of saying he was not involved in the murder at all, he used the prescription drugs excuse. He said that prescription drugs altered his mind and removed his ability to know right from wrong, to the point that he thought God directed him to perpetrate a crime to protect his daughter Emily. Donald lost his appeal. His conviction was upheld. Donald then decided on yet another strategy. He claimed his lawyer, Michael Simpson, was ineffective, ignored his mental health issues, and failed to request a psychiatric evaluation. He said he had suffered an injury years ago and took various painkillers and medications, including prescribed hormones and other medications known to cause sleepwalking or other complex behaviors performed while not fully awake. Michael Simpson said, Donald never indicated any kind of psychosis or any kind of abnormal behavior that would lead him to believe Donald was anything other than competent and able to assist in his own defense. Michael Simpson withdrew from the case. Donald Skybane's appeal was dismissed. His conviction stands. Hannah's family moved her grave from South Beach back to her home state of Missouri. She was buried next to her father's grave. Emily is now living with Hannah's mother and spends a lot of time with her Aunt Kathleen. Kathleen says whenever she talks about her mother, she smiles a lot and it's clear that their relationship was always full of laughter and fun. Kathleen said the loss of her sister profoundly affected so many people, but the biggest tragedy is how her daughter will grow up without a mom that was so devoted to her. Hannah's biggest and purest joy in life was being a mother, and Kathleen said she has no doubt Hannah was thinking of sweet little Emily as she took her last breath. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Tom's True Crime. Be sure to like and subscribe to our channel for more in-depth investigations into the most perplexing crimes. Do you have any thoughts about this case? Please share them with us in the comments below. Until next time, stay safe.